I've done webinars using this kind of setting, and it goes beyond. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the setup. I mean, there's so much you can set up in terms of invitations. I used it to Eventbrite, and then you'd get an invitation, and that would lock into PayPal, and they could pay for it. But once you get everything, there's a lot of marketing that you can do. It lets you set up like intro letters to people like, hey, thank you for signing up for the webinar, and thank you, it'll be in this amount of time. And you can set up different time delayed ways to contact people. But once you get all of the technical stuff out of the way,
there are many different layers to them.
Right, there's different layers, but you still have to know how to present in a webinar. And sometimes it's hard when, like right now, Gilda and I, we're talking to each other, and there's somebody to play off of. But when you're in a webinar, sometimes you're just staring at the little light right at the top of your screen. So Gilda, you're the queen of knowing how to look into a camera and not have that intimidating. What's your advice for when there's no back and forth and you're just looking right at the screen?
That is probably one of the most challenging things that you could ever take on. And if you have had no experience speaking just alone and being entertaining, as we call it here, then you have to start practicing. And the only way to practice is to look into a camera and act as though you have a billion people out there in front of you. Now, one of the things that is best when I have a camera in a little dark room, a professional camera, and bingo, you're on.
Yeah.
And what I do, I treat the camera as though it's a regular person, and I speak to it. They could lock you up for these kinds of behaviors, but I speak to it as though it is a real live person, and I'm going to get back some kind of feedback. Right. Now, we draw from feedback. I know for me, there is nothing more exciting than speaking in front of a live audience, because I can sense where, if they're getting it, if they're not getting it, how to change accordingly. I can sense that, and it's wonderful fun. And of course, you can't script that, because if things go awry, you have to be ready at that moment to change course. Fortunately, I had a lot of experience with this on all of the daytime talk shows, because nothing ever went according to the information that I received. And we always got pre-interviews of the people, et cetera, et cetera. But one person would say something and another person would say something else, and boom, there would be a big explosion on stage. And you have to be that present in your mind to be able to go for that moment. So you don't have that option when you're talking to an inanimate camera, as we're doing here, except that I have wonderful Diane to talk against and with, and we have like a party together. You don't have that option when you're all by yourself. So you have to make sure that whatever you do is quick, to the point. And this is where, and I don't ordinarily use slides and presentation pieces, but this is where you throw something in and you talk around that. You take it off, don't leave it on too long. This is one of the mistakes that people make. They leave the slide on too long, and the person is already jumping a million miles ahead of what you're about to say. So you have to sense what is the right amount of time for people to read the slide, or at least interpret it, and have some kind of brain power going with it, and then move on to something else.
It's interesting because today I, for one of my universities for which I teach, I have to do 2 1 hours a week of separate live being available for the students. It's not necessarily a lecture. It's if they have questions or whatever, but I always put my slide up, which is just very plain, just so that they have like, this is week 4 or whatever it is. But whenever you're training, have something up there that they don't have to read, but it just is just not going to make them distracted and reading and looking all over the place. But I think that sharing your screen can be really impactful in a webinar of different things. Like if you're trying to teach somebody how to do something, I know I teach a lot of HR professionals and different individuals how to give my certification training, like for the Curiosity Code Index I created, I certify people, right? So I show them things like what my notebook looks like and on what page and what things to point out and what this box means and what this graphic means. And when you're in a training session, which is a lot of HR people are doing that, they're needing to have the visual aspect. So it's nice to be able to share your screen. But I think a lot of people are, especially HR and training individuals, are looking for ways to help leaders become more tech savvy right now, because in the past they had their assistant or whoever next to them to get them out when it crashed. And they're looking around and they're on mute and they don't know, what I mean? And it's a huge problem. And so I think that this kind of training could be really helpful for people who now have to rely on this kind of medium to get through, and they don't have somebody right next to them to bail them out. So I think that this kind of lesson, and just not just the technology, but the way to interact. I watched a video the other day of a president of a university, and it was all about female empowerment. And then meanwhile, he's got a woman sitting next to him in this just few feet away, but in the screen. And I don't know if she's taking notes, being a secretary there to help him with his technology or what it was, but it didn't come across well when we were talking about women empowerment. He didn't introduce her, and she's just sitting there. So, there's this, think about what's around you. Think about what your message you're sending. If you're talking about empowerment, are you empowering people around you? The message, it goes beyond. I think that a lot of people don't take into account how they're coming across to the screen. And so what's kind of like a checklist of things you run through in your mind before you get onto a webinar? Do you clean up around you, what are the things that you do?
That's an important question to ask.
Yes.
The homework that you do before is probably more important than the actual screen time that you get. Now, understand that. A lot of people don't want to put in that prep time.
Right.
When I used to do court TV and argued with the lawyers day in and day out on court TV, and I did that for years. The preparation that I had to do in advance, reading the cases, taking my notes and all, nobody ever saw. But I had to be knowledgeable about what I was going to speak about.